Good late Thursday or late Friday, meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now. Giving you a look at that map across the region. You do see temperatures right now. A lot of 70s still on the board. There are some 60s, in our southwest Georgia counties. I mean, look there toward areas like Blakely and Early County, 61. I know they always read a little bit cooler out that way, but definitely seeing that temperature contrast here as we're looking at things a little bit as we have some more of that coastal influence off toward the east. You see some of these showers around, like toward Gainesville and the like here. Not a whole bunch right now compared to what we've seen and what we're going to see here. But, you see the warmer air, the clouds more around. That's where we have our general thunderstorm risk. As you look on the just the more broad perspective here. I'll go ahead and take the radar off, take the wind areas off, as you see that wind coming from the east and the northeast, but that's going to be an issue here. We have a coastal flood warning we have to be watching out for, but let me go ahead and put on, our satellite view just a little bit better. It's not much different. You kind of already see it, but I definitely seeing some of those clouds out there, the overcast conditions. I know it doesn't come up on here as well as it could in some ways. I mean, it's not, just completely, full of clouds all the way around, but there are definitely a lot here in the view, as we're looking a lot of low top activity. I know we've been tracking like back on that Thursday and that, we're not seeing a whole bunch of lightning, for instance, but we're going to keep watching here, keep tracking things, You don't want the lightning at an inopportune time to disrupt like some of those football games around. I know rain will mess up baseball, but lightning you have to really get that delay here with a football. So something to be kind of mindful of here as we're tracking things across the region. I know. Let's go ahead and take off the infrared, put just the radar on here, and you can kind of see some of the shower activity, some toward like Nassau County. In fact, let me go ahead and switch to other mode. It's going to actually show just kind of the overall look at things here, and it's going to show just, the pattern here. Another radar kind of picking up on some other stuff here too, because we have just a pretty active type of scenario here with the atmospheric conditions. But you see around Fernandina Beach, you see some heavy downpour action. And then you also see some of this embedded in like southern Duval County here and there. That's right near the St. Johns River, maybe right over it, in fact. So that kind of tells the story. You see some stuff. I know some of this green out here, we don't have the yellows and reds. That's false echoes. But down here, that looks to be some rain around Gainesville there in Alachua County as well. So we're watching some of that there on the Doppler. I know, just continuing to keep you informed on all of that. Let me go ahead and put on here our wind arrows on our other map here as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. I think this is important to kind of show you guys here as we give you guys the very latest on what is transpiring here in terms of a coastal flood warning. Now, that is something that just came out here in the last, half hour or so from the Weather Service in Jacksonville. It looks like 2:01, so just over a half hour ago. Here, if you're watching live at 2:30 on this Friday morning, we're doing this update. We do them really late, but we get the latest information this way. A lot of the updates can come in during the night like this. I know there's not a coastal flood warning. I just an advisory, which we have, until 5 p.m. But we now have an actual coastal flood warning, which, we had a lot, in these nor'easters, some more powerful ones. We can get us, not to a level of a storm surge, but it's the general idea of a lower end type storm surge. Not quite enough to turn the logo red. I mean, I was debating it, but not quite there with that, but it's not far off. There's some odd characteristics about this. There's not, maybe a real severe chance of like tornadoes and stuff. So we're not going to turn the logo red, but we're going to be watching things. I mean, it's not impossible to get a rogue warning here or there and something, but not really anticipating that. We would have to watch a little bit because of the tropic potential. If that really started to mature, then maybe we do get a, tornado threat, obviously, then we would turn the logo red, but there's only a 10% chance of this overall pattern. We're watching maybe a low developing later on, turning, into something tropical. So pretty unlikely, but with that, as we're looking toward the weekend here, but it's going to be wet, going to be kind of nasty here at times. So we have a coastal flood warning there for the St. Johns River Basin, parts of Clay Putnam, Duval, St. Johns counties there from 5 p.m. this afternoon to 5 a.m. Monday for the coastal flood advisory. Minor tidal flooding around times of high tide, is the story until 5 p.m. But after that, we're talking about significant tidal flooding expected to begin during the Friday evening and overnight high tide. I know I almost feel like it's a holiday weekend with all the football, including that Monday night game, but not a holiday weekend, though, as we're looking and as we're tracking things here, as we're giving you guys the latest. But we're just trying to keep you guys up to date here. I know numerous roads, in theory, could be closed, toward the St. Johns River Basin at small times in the timeline, and then low-lying property, including homes, businesses, and some critical infrastructure could experience some issues with some shoreline erosion that's going to occur as well. So some of those flood-prone areas could have issues along the St. Johns River Basin. Let's have a coastal flood warning now from 5 p.m. this afternoon to 5 a.m. Monday. As we're looking toward coastal Duval, coastal Flagler, northeast coastal St. Johns, and southeast coastal St. Johns. Large breaking waves of 6 to 8 feet as well. That's a high surf type advisory situation. We're going to also have dangerous rip currents. But then significant coastal flooding to begin around the late afternoon and early evening, high tide on Friday. Again, coastal Duval, coastal Flagler, northeast coastal St. Johns, and southeast coastal St. Johns. Not a time to be going to the beach, Roy, with the rip current danger being high. So just be very mindful of that, obviously, as we're watching things and as we're tracking them. We do have that coastal flood warning, which I don't get a whole bunch. You definitely can get it, sure, but you just have to be kind of mindful of what we're doing with here, what we're tracking. We're trying to give you guys the very latest, obviously, on what's going on here and toward the Weather Center. So, that's just kind of the storyline there. Let me go ahead and keep looking at things, keep tracking things here in the Weather Center. Again, you see that wind direction. That's going to play a key role in that forecast as we look ahead into some of those football games. Could have some showers. High school football like Bradford at Palatka there. Bring that poncho just in case. Same for the Gators game against Texas in Gainesville, the FSU Miami game in Tallahassee there, and the Jaguar Kansas City game in Jacksonville. So the Friday night high school football games, Saturday games, and then Monday Night Football is Jacksonville hosting Kansas City. So a lot going on, obviously. Be very mindful here of things. There's, again, a small chance we could get something tropically to develop here. As I go ahead and go to the graphic system here, you see here our graphics. Looking at Jerry, Karen here, our next two names on the list. So we'll be mindful of that, obviously, as we're looking, as we're tracking things. We'll be mindful here as we're giving you guys the very latest on all of this. We're trying to keep you guys up to date here on the situation. So, not something that we're expecting to become tropical here, but we'll continue to watch things, obviously. So Lorenzo, Melissa, the names after that. Just remain alert as hurricane season lasts for almost 2 more months. Granted, after about October 10th, October 15th, you start to become less concerned in general. But, we have that 10% area. That's in the short term, really. Something might develop with a low around Miami and come across, and that, could influence the rain, maybe spread a little more inland even. We'll see. And then toward the Big Bend, maybe as well. They need some rain over there. There's drought concern, and we're going to get some, but not as much as other places. It's weird. We have like a flood concern to our eastern areas, and then there's, even though we're going to get some rain toward Tallahassee, there still is a drought concern that probably isn't going to be, really fixed by all this rain out that way. So you got to be very mindful of that. You see 30% chance. That's why I say that eastern system models are kind of all over the place right now with some different things further out. But, I see that and I say, well, let's just be careful because it's been so warm. I know it has been a little bit nicer, even though it's been wet. A little bit cool here in some ways outside, but the waters are still warm. We have maybe not as much shear coming up in some of these areas. So I would say it's not impossible, if we're going to have a really late season system, even later than like what we had with Milton and Michael and Matthew, which at this point, it would, that 30% system would probably be a little later than that if we somehow had something with it. Not saying we will by any, stretch here, but in case we did, we'll just have to be watching it probably later on. I know one of the latest, maybe the latest really, really, really impactful system here to hit, Florida in, recent memory. Granted, it was a good while ago. It was Wilma back in '05. So we don't want to let our guard down here, is what I'm saying. That hit, closer toward the 20th or so in toward the month. I know we had Sandy hit really late up in toward the northeast there, you know. That was something that was officially not tropical, but really impactful. So we can still have problems late in the year. But for Florida, it was Wilma was one of the later ones here, in terms of the really, really big impact, devastating, obviously being retired there. As we're looking and as we're tracking things, I mean, Wilma was a very big deal in '05. So, that was a much more active season. We already had Katrina though. So, but, I just, because everything's so warm, it's not like we've had a bunch of fronts just come through and we're not in the 40s or something outside. Or, it's not over yet. We haven't had hardly anything in the Gulf this year. Just be really careful here. Since we haven't had a lot, I feel like, and there's actually some of the conditions seem to be becoming more favorable, even if we're not seeing a whole bunch in the models that some are showing stuff recurving, but just, I wouldn't let our guard down. We've had systems, develop along, areas there toward the Gulf, of course, Michael with the CAG there, that Central American gyre, such a problem. So you just can't let your guard down here at all. You got to be remaining vigilant just in case here, as we're looking over the next few weeks. I mean, you can't let your guard down by any stretch here. I mean, Wilma was a big storm in '05. So again, let's be very mindful, obviously, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. I know, that was a devastating storm. Again, we had way more storms that year. Maybe we don't have, these storms get to the potential, what they could. And there's a chance we could get a front end, that's a little more powerful in a little over a week. We'll see. And then, maybe we don't get it. Tropical development is, as much of a concern. But then we could have to start to, get into our severe weather season. We'll have to watch out for that. So, that's something to kind of be mindful of there as we're looking and as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. So we're continuing to be mindful here. Well, want to be vigilant, obviously. Just kind of stay tuned here for the latest in terms of all that. I mean, I say it's not really cold yet by any stretch around here, but if we'll go to the north real quick, let's go ahead and go toward the map here. I know just important to kind of do that as we're looking and as we're tracking things. You can see looking up here, looking up toward areas like around New York and New Jersey. I mean, I know they're happy around New York. A lot of folks are anyway, the Yankee fans, about their team winning Thursday night in Major League Baseball. I know it's 39, 40 degrees there in some of these areas, 39, in toward the West Hampton Beach area out there, in New York there. So that's something to kind of be mindful of as we're looking at things. Some of that cool air's up there. Now, the Mets fans probably not so happy about the Yankees getting the job done, but you kind of see that dip there with the overall temperatures further northeast. But you don't see that out toward, the Midwest, for instance. I mean, they're pretty similar, maybe slightly cooler than where we're at, toward like the heartland of the country, like Farmington's at 64, Missouri 63, Cape Girardeau 66, St. Louis. And then as you look toward Texas, you see it's even warmer out there. And look how hot it is in Phoenix. I know there's at least a chance we could get some type of tropical spin up in there next week. We have some different areas out there in the Pacific. It's been really active in the Pacific this year. We'll have to just be careful. Could have some of that moisture around Phoenix next week. We'll see. Yes. It could be something, less impactful or really impactful. We'll see on that as we look out there toward Arizona. But as we go ahead and just continue to give you guys the very latest on all this, let me jump back over toward the graphics here. We're trying to give you guys the very latest on all this, obviously. Let me go ahead and see our tropical climatology. You can see the peak of hurricane season's past, but we still in early October have to be really remaining vigilant here because we could still have some systems evolve on us that is, be very mindful here of what could happen. Be very mindful here of what could happen as we're looking and as we're tracking things here in toward the weather center. I mean, as we get, and normally I say October 10th, I just, maybe we're going to be okay. I mean, we've been really, we've had stuff and they don't, really evolve. But I don't want you guys to let your guard down. We have that 10% chance of that one system will watch it. I'm not overly concerned about it, but don't let your guard down there. We're going to have moisture in this pattern. It's going to be wet, going to be nasty. Could get a flood watch. In addition to the coastal flood warning, we could get a flood watch. We already have one in the Melbourne office region there downstate. So let me see if we got anything recently. They might have. Make sure they haven't issued something on me here. No, Melbourne's the only one with one. But again, I just continuing, to be monitoring things. That's what you need to do. I'm not trying to hype things up by any stretch. I just, don't want you guys to be caught off guard. As we go ahead and look, we remember all these terrible tropical cyclones here. Since 1950, I mean, in 85, who would have thought that they would have had a hurricane right before Thanksgiving? They're with Hurricane Kate toward Tallahassee and toward Thomasville, toward Cairo, toward Moultrie, toward Tifton, that still today remains the worst for those areas. Those 5 counties there, worse than for Tallahassee, Thomasville, Cairo, Moultrie, and Tifton, based on my assessment of things, worse than Michael, worse than Helene. You kind of get the idea. So, that was, right there before Thanksgiving. That was a very impactful system, so things can still happen in November. They can happen in later November. Now, Michael's on October 10th, Matthew's around October 10th, and all these other systems here, as I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything, and now Alberta was July. That was a tropical storm, but a terrible flood of that, obviously. The river is just, the Flint River, a disaster. Again, we always talk about it, but that name should have been retired. David there, we've already passed that anniversary. Dora, we passed that there. Same, right time frame is Irma. Easy, we already passed that. So, again, Michael's anniversary is coming up in a week. That'll be your 7-year anniversary. Kate's 40th anniversary is coming up here in a little over, a month and a half really is, the timeline for that. So, again, that's kind of storyline there as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things with all that. So, again, just trying to keep you guys up to date there as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So, again, just trying to keep you guys informed here. Just trying to keep you guys informed as we're looking, as we're tracking things here in toward the Weather Center. Let me go ahead and jump along here though in the graphics, and you can see our rainfall forecast. I made sure to put the updated one in because this just came out right before we got on here. Because this is noteworthy. You see this coastal areas on average 4 inches there next 7 days. So you gotta be really careful. You're going to have flood concern in addition to the wind pattern with the northeastern winds, all that issue with that. We got to watch out for the rain here too. Got to watch out for the rain because that, pattern is going to kind of cause this rainfall, to pile on up there. So they're talking about Flagler and St. John's and over toward Putnam and Clay and up into Duval County and Nassau and into Camden and even Glen here, it looks like. And even up all the way to Charleston now, as a Royal Watson, we're going to have quite a bit of rain. A lot of this is going to really be for our area Saturday through Monday, the worst of this. There could be some today on this Friday, but Saturday through Monday, that's where we're going to have the greater concern here. Again, we're right on the edge of needing to turn the logo red. We did last week because there was high-end potential with Imelda, and that did not, thankfully, verify. That's going to be worse toward our beaches, in terms of the rain with the coastal flood warning, and what we saw with Imelda. This overall pattern is going to be worse, quite a bit worse. I mean, Imelda really didn't do a lot in that regard. We did have the water, high tide be an issue there. Alana Beach, I know they were, having some problems, but in terms of just the pattern here, more localized in terms of not just the broad Atlantic, we're still having some influence from the remnants of Umberto, post-tropical systems out there. I know we had Imelda hit Bermuda, hit them pretty hard out there, but that the ocean still stirred up, and now we're going to have this. So, on our coastal zones here, in our coastal zones, have to be aware. I mean, even Stark, we're going to get probably a couple inches here. Most of this, see next 7 days, but really Saturday through Monday is the bulk of this. And today we'll have to watch some too. You see it says right here, if you look where Bradford is, I mean, I know it more because, done this map a lot over the years here. Looked at this map a lot over the years, but I know we're just kind of always trying to figure things out. I know, but Bradford, 2.5 inches here of precip. I know there's where Bradford is on that. As we're looking and as we're tracking things, I know, just really, important to kind of keep an eye on where that is in the grand scheme of things. But you kind of, again, see, just 2.5 inches of rain there as we're looking and as we're tracking things here over the next 7 days on average. Some spots will get more. We see the east there, that's where we have 4 inches on average. I mean, obviously some spots will get even more than that. I mean, really, if you look at the color table, I know it's really sometimes hard to tell the differences. This is the official forecast from the Weather Prediction Center. I mean, I have trouble. Really, I guess that would be the 5-inch mark there on average toward the east. I know these colors blend together sometimes, but just looking at the color table, I see 2.5, then I see 3, then I see 4. So yeah, that'd be 5 inches actually right of the immediate coast there on average over the next 7 days. I mean, that tells a story. That's a lot here, folks. I mean, some isolated areas are going to have over half a foot of rain. Now, some of that will be more spread out, but, even over a few days, that can cause some issues. Not as much as, a few hours, but I know you can go to clutter.com/radar for an interactive look at things we're not on the air. So just be very mindful of all of this potential, all this concern here as we're looking, toward the east. I know toward Gainesville tomorrow, that Saturday on ESPN. The Texas Longhorns and Arch Manning will be coming into town to face the Gators, who have really struggled in terms of wins and losses. I don't know if they're as bad as their record indicates because they have had some tough games, tough competition. LSU and Miami come to mind on UNUSF there, pretty tough as well. But I mean, low 80s, 60% chance of rain, breezy to windy, I would say, even at points maybe, and a showered, isolated thunderstorm possible. But that wind could be, really felt by the kickers, by the fans there, at that game. All these are going to have some impact here. Are going to have some impact here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. This wind is going to have that impact here. So that will be something to watch. Even if we don't get as much of the rain at the wrong times to impact the games, that wind could be problematic here as we're looking, and it can impact the kickers there. And as we get toward Tallahassee, what a huge game this is for the Noles. The whole country will be focused, watching Tallahassee, Doak Campbell Stadium, Bobby Bowden Field Saturday night. Lee Corso is going to be recognized there, honored for his decades of college football, excellence there. I mean, what a great broadcaster. What a nice guy he seems to be. I remember when I was at school at FSU, seeing ESPN College Game Day in person a few times in Langford Green. I wish they would have been there this week. It didn't work out that way. I've been there still since 2014 now, when I was there. It should have been, they should have been there in 2023, but Lee's now retired, but he's going to be honored there. So the most important person, the one that's going to be honored there Saturday night. And upper 70s, 55% chance of rain. Breezy, showers, isolated thunderstorm possible. If we get a thunderstorm that causes a delay, that's the lower chance, really, than the rain by a good bit. But one strike, you get a 30-minute delay. In general, it's within an 8-mile radius. But, what a huge game this is for the Noles. Of course, the quarterback for FSU there, Tommy Castellanos, going up against Carson Beck. This is, a game here where I know you don't have ESPN College Game Day, but you have the ACC Huddle crew that's going to be there. Taylor Tannenbaum and Jimbo Fisher on those. They'll be there for 2 hours with a pregame from 10 to noon on Saturday. I think they're even going to be there today with some live coverage. They group from the ACC channel there, ACC Network. And then as we look on that Saturday night, they're going to have a special broadcast there with some folks. I mentioned Taylor Tannenbaum because he's an FSU grad, and then Jimbo Fisher there. He's, the legendary former FSU coach. I know he won that national title when I was there. What a great team that was, obviously, getting that job done there at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, ironically against Gus Malzahn's the Auburn Tigers. He's now the FSU offensive coordinator under head coach Mike Norvell. But what an incredible win that was in 2013, holding up that Crystal Trophy for the Noles there in Pasadena. So exciting. That was the third national title. Probably should have had the fourth there in 2023, but weren't given that opportunity. It wouldn't have been a crystal ball because they did away with that in terms of that night presentation anyway. But what a great win that was for FSU out there in Pasadena, California. It wasn't in the Rose Bowl game, but it was at the Rose Bowl Stadium there. It was the last BCS national title before they went to the 4-team playoff. Just what an incredible win that was there, though, for Florida State University. So exciting there back then. So let's go ahead and keep looking at things, keep tracking them. The Jaguar game, you can see here against Kansas City. Mahomes coming into town there. Travis Kelce coming into town there Monday night against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Trevor Lawrence there, head coach Liam Cohen. The Jags, 3-1. Their general manager James Gladstone there. What a team the Jags have been so far. But right now, Kansas City, they played really well against Baltimore, and it's going to be really tough for Jacksonville to win. Apparently, it is Trevor Lawrence's birthday, though, from what I understand. So maybe that'll, give the Jags the extra boost they need to win that game there on Monday Night Football with Joe and Troy coming into town on ESPN and on ABC. That game will be shown. So that's exciting there. As the whole country has their eyes tuned to Jacksonville, just like Tallahassee Saturday night on ABC and ACC Network Monday night on ABC and ESPN, the whole country will have their eyes tuned to Jacksonville. So Tallahassee Saturday night, Jacksonville Monday night. If the Gators would have been better, Gainesville would have, really, the whole country would be watching Gainesville Saturday afternoon. Still, a lot of folks will be watching that game, I'm sure, Saturday afternoon. That with Arch Manning and the Texas Longhorns coming into town. SEC Nation, I believe, is coming to Gainesville. Tebow and his group there on the SEC Network. But I know, that's a game that people will be watching, obviously, because I don't think Texas has faced, besides their one loss, they haven't had a tough test in a win. They lost that game against Ohio State to start the year. But I'll have to see how they play there because they've not played all that well, even though they're number 9. But again, just, continuing to keep you guys up to date here on everything. The weather could play a role here, whether it's, the games themselves or even like the ACC Huddle show Saturday morning that everybody be going to, in the word Tallahassee. Let's see the covered map again. Of course, we're watching Leon County there when we talk about that. So let me go ahead and say you that here. Again, the actual game itself, we could have rain Saturday morning. Of course, folks there going to that game in Gainesville there, or the SEC and Nation show with Tim Tebow and the rest of that group there. That'll be something that people are watching, the Gator fans, Texas fans, and the like. That's something that could be impacted by some weather. Some passing chances of thunderstorm may be higher. Gainesville look like some heavier convection than modeling, but we're, Gainesville, that forecast, you're able to see a little bit more because it's a little bit earlier in the timeline. You're about 48 hours, and I know it sounds like we should be past it, but when you look at the 48-hour runs, when I was, getting everything together for the show, we didn't have that running that really covered the FSU game time. But Gainesville, they could have some issues here. Of course, we don't have the Jacksonville one either because that's getting a little bit too far out as we're looking there with the high-res models. But there's a lot of football games, and there could be some weather. The lightning threat's lower than we generally have because there's going to be so much cloud cover, but it's definitely not zero. The rain chance, is there. There's a decent chance. I probably could have went a little higher on these. We're not, is the thing about it is these rain chances here aren't necessarily for just, hours and hours of delays here. Not necessarily expecting hours and hours of delays as we're looking and as we're tracking things here. If it was baseball, yeah, we probably would have that risk. Gotta have those ponchos, but this is not a big, thunderstorm event. No breezes will be there. These aren't, expected to be severe storms in general, but we could have a few stronger ones, sure. But it's more of a, what we've been seeing here around Jacksonville, Stark here. We're going to see that, but with a little bit more, veracity here with the rain and the winds here at points. So that's kind of what to expect as you look ahead. I know not expecting, too much craziness in terms of like, severe weather. There's a formal risk out as we get toward the west here today on that Friday. Though they say here on our marginal risk, you can see from parts of Montana, Idaho, getting there into Wyoming, and then getting even into toward parts there of Utah and Colorado, a little bit of Arizona, New Mexico. We're watching that risk there of some severe weather on that Friday. I'll have to watch for that, the hail risk, the wind risk. That's something to be mindful of as we look at things and as we track them. So, and down towards South Florida, we see some convecting off the coast right now, even, at 3 a.m. or so when we're doing this live. If you're watching the live, stream itself, not watching on, I say DVR functionality, but really just, after watching later in the morning. But there's some accent around, or is, if you're watching live, accent here east, south of Miami. And we're watching, some of this stuff, if we get a load to develop down there, that was to organize. In theory, it could become Jerry. I kind of doubt it, but, that could kind of spread more of the rain further over west. But, eastern counties are definitely going to have some of that precip here as we look at things and as we track them. Now, I was looking at some model guidance here, and I know I sipped in around here because I didn't mean to pull that up, to be quite honest, but the point of that is it actually does show some of that wind concentrating towards some more areas here in the days ahead. You saw some of those oranges indicative of that. So that's kind of storyline there as we're looking and as we're tracking things. Let me go ahead and show you the graphics here now with that 7-day. You see a 50% chance of rain on that Friday here on this Friday. Areas east more, Tallahassee less. There's not a general thunderstorm risk for Tallahassee, but there is for, Lake City and Live Oak and Perry and Gainesville, Jacksonville, Palatka, Stark, where, the tornadoes coming from Stark will be playing. The Bradford High School tornadoes will be going down to Palatka to take on, I believe, the Palatka Panthers. And that'll be a big game, of course. And the weather, we'll have to see if that plays a role in terms of some of that. Thunderstorm risk for Brunswick there as well. So, on Saturday, Sunday, let me see if they put out there's thunderstorm risk yet in terms of the actual markings, because it's not a summer day, so it's not a guarantee we'll have it out. Okay, for Saturday, SPC has put that out, and they do not have Tallahassee under a thunderstorm risk in theory. Doesn't mean there won't be a thunderstorm or one line you try to delay a game for 30 minutes within the radius. We had that there, against Kent State, some issues with that, but that would not be good with the Nates and Watson and another lightning strike and delay things, but that would definitely hurt viewership and the like, as people might turn their attention to a different game. But if you have to have a delay, you have to have it for health and safety concerns. But, as you're looking there, Gainesville does have a thunderstorm risk according to the SPC on that Saturday. Jacksonville, Lake City's right on the edge. Brunswick's in there, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, all in there. The Bucks are going out to Seattle on Sunday. And they don't have a thunderstorm risk on Sunday out there. But on Sunday, the thunderstorm risk goes all through all of Florida. So, spreading a little bit more over that little pressure trying to whatever becomes of it. If it does, it might kind of spread the risk a little bit further over. We South Sea, see the higher rain chances, 60-70% as we're looking ahead. 60 Saturday, 70 Sunday, 60 Monday. Monday's not officially a holiday, but the Jaguars are playing Monday Night Football, and it's against Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. I mean, they've won so many Super Bowls. Andy Reid, that's a huge game. The whole country will have their eyes turned to Jacksonville Monday night for one of the bigger Jaguar home games in regular season recent memory. That Tennessee game a few years ago, I think it was, to get into the playoffs there. That was a big one, but they're not, this time of year, this is probably the biggest home game they've had in a long time. And then, or Saturday night, everybody watching Tallahassee and FSU against Miami. But that's a huge game for the Noles. I mean, you lose that one with a playoff hope start to have a lot of trouble. If you win, you're right back up into maybe the top 10 or so. But in the AP and the like. But that Monday night game, the whole country be watching that. Obviously, Jacksonville won a Monday night game in over a decade that I recall. So it's something where they really, it's going to be something where they have to really try hard. They won that Monday night one on Saturday night against Tennessee. That is a playoff play-in game pretty much, against the Titans, like 22 on ESPN and ABC. But it's a situation here, and the Jags had that win against Chargers, of course, in the playoffs with Al Michaels on that call there against the LA Chargers. back in the beginning of 23. But, it's one of the bigger non-December, Jaguar regular season home games, maybe, since the turn of the century even. I mean, I don't want to, I wouldn't quite watching them maybe in 2000 necessarily, but there were some really good teams. And this is one of the bigger Jaguar home games. It's playoff, non-December type of game that you ever have against Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes. I think it's going to be really tough for the Jags to win it, though. But if they can get that job done, the whole country will be tuning their attention to Jacksonville. I mean, San Fran looks decent. They won, even though backup quarterback Mac Jones doing a great job against, really tougher than that against the Rams on that Thursday night. But, the Jacksonville native, he was filling in for Brock Purdy, who was injured, or still injured, recovering. Mac Jones having some injury problems too, but, really, again, toughing it out. Really great effort by him. But as you're looking there Monday night, I know if the Jags win, all of a sudden people were saying, are the Jags maybe the top, type of team in the league other than maybe Philadelphia? The whole country will be turning their attention to Duval County. If they lose, they'll be back, to kind of more, they're decent. They're going to maybe win the AFC South, right in the contention with Indy, but that's about it. So we shall see. It's a big deal, though. Monday night at Everbank Stadium. Saturday night at Doak Campbell Stadium at Bobby Bowden Field. Really big deal. Again, want everybody, with this weather, to stay safe there. It's going to be wet. Could be a little slippery in the stands. So be careful with that. I mean, you got to go if you're going to go, unless, there's something where you're really concerned about, slipping, and the like, if there's something where, it's just, you're already kind of on the fringe. If you're able to go, if you have like a cold or something, and then you're afraid you're going to get worse because of the raininess there, then maybe not. But in general, this is not whether to cancel your plans over. Really don't expect. I mean, you never know. These are hard to forecast. We've seen this before, but I don't really expect lightning delays here for these games. The most likely one being during the day would be the Gator one there against Texas. Quite honestly, I would think if we were to have a delay, because you have a little bit better chance of the lightning during the day with the convection there. But, it's going to be breezy, going to have, some coolest conditions here at times. There's ponchos, but don't really expect, extended lightning delays. There's not quite that pattern. We're in October, even though it's going to be warm. And we could have a lightning strike, and then you have the problem. It's more about the rain, more about the wetness here and the breeziness. So be prepared for that. A lot of folks, tens of thousands outdoors, in Tallahassee, in Gainesville, in Jacksonville. So very big, we're talking, there's so many people outside in the elements, all the high school games coming up tonight, so it's going to be wet at times. Be prepared. Have those ponchos. You're not generally allowed to bring an umbrella into a stadium, so poncho. But, the lightning delay chances are not as high as they generally would be with these type of rain chances. So this was late August, early September, we'd be really saying probably have a delay, but can't guarantee that even then. But here, of course we could. It's not impossible. It's not like 40 degrees and rain in here. Nothing like that. So definitely can have lightning. It's possible. And again, I think Gainesville will be the spot where I think it would be most likely to have that type of delay. Of course, we got to watch out for some of those events here or there with the accumulation of things. The chances just automatically go up with probability for things, like the ACC huddle. So, the SEC Nation, if we were to get something in the morning there, a quick thunderstorm moving through, then all of a sudden they have to make alternative plans. So, I think Monday Night Countdown on ESPN, I think they do that. I don't know I haven't watched that pregame in a while because we're just watching the ABC part of it. But, I don't know if they're outside, they might have to be making some plans as well. But, just something to be kind of mindful of here, and the like, as we're tracking things. I'm sure all the local stations in the Jacksonville will be out and about Monday, leading up to that game Monday night. They'll have to be watching the weather, and, making any plans here to make any changes as we're looking and as we're tracking things. But, again, you can see the temperature trends. 86, 87 by Wednesday there. That's above average a little bit. So again, that's why I say we still got to watch the tropics, even though it's in October. These are really temperatures you would expect to see in September. No, it's just barely October, but the averages here, these are the averages on the screen for October 3rd. By next Thursday, though, you're seeing what the forecast is there for October 9th, and we're above the averages for October 3rd. So my point is, we're seeing a September like temperature still. So until we started to see, like 70s, it's still gonna be, 83 for the high today. That's, an 83 Sunday, 84 Saturday. That's cooler than we've been seeing, but and then you see the above average though becomes a bigger story. As we look ahead, and that just gives you an idea that we haven't really got cool air into completely wipe away that tropics threat yet. I know when we were in November with tropical storm Ada there, we were in the Greek alphabet in 2020. With that, it was a situation where it really started to break up here as it got toward North Florida, because it was already, we're getting the cool air to come in, and by then we probably would, that's Veterans Day time, but for the next month or so, I would, we could have a legit system getting to our North Florida counties, still South Florida counties, so please stay aware here. I don't want you to let your guard down by any stretch. In fact, I'm going to look at the latest Euro model, because the GFS was recurving something out there. Euro had been concerned, the operational run from the ensemble, not so much about something way out there. We've been showing you some of that potential. Let me just look at it real quick to see if there's anything that, piques my interest here. Well, it's showing the recurvature at least through 240 hours now. That doesn't mean that could change one way or the other, sure. And if we get cooler to come in, we start to have more of a severe threat with storms, and then, the lows over land and the storms, and then you kind of start to reduce here, reduce that overall threat with the, tropics. Then we have more of the severe weather systems you can get in October, November, December, on into the early months in 2026. That's always a possibility. So just kind of looking at things, kind of tracking them here. I'm going to go through the rest of this, obviously, on my end. I just want to look at the modeling, because it just came out since one. So like the Euro model is even out now, and I'm just going to run it through here to see if there's any notable changes here. If anything I got to tell you guys about. Just seeing that Royal recurves way to the east right now, an area we're watching further out. I don't really see anything coming up toward Florida on that. That's good. There's 360 hours in theory. Could change quickly. Milton changed pretty quick back last year with the model, and we got to watch that area there up toward the east, of course. So, just right off the east for the weekend with the higher rain chances. Some areas I had it up 2 to 4 with isolated 7+ for the coastal counties. That really, stands, if not even a little bit higher, possibly, right at the, Atlantic coast itself. Some of the areas I would say more like 3 to 5 with isolated 8+ tense totals, definitely a possibility, especially at Saturday to Monday timeline, right there at the coast, the coastal parts of those counties. As we're looking there, coastal, Flagler, St. John's, Duval, Nassau, Camden, and Glenn, you have to be very mindful here. All that precip coming on in there. Obviously, as we're looking and as we're tracking things, just have to be kind of paying attention here. Because it could have a few, flood alerts, already the coastal flood warning I've talked about here, as we're looking and as we're tracking. But one more thing, I was thinking about trees, in terms of the cold fronts, knocking them down here and the like. And let's say 2014. Let's go ahead and do that, because I was kind of just really thinking about the front. But it made me think of something that happened when I was at FSU. I had this doing our graphic system, our graphic source. Let me go ahead and see here what I'm talking about. So this was weather history. October 14, 2014 was a strong front coming on through, and we had a huge tree fall near the old FSU bookstore in Woodward Garage, covering the road down. I mean, I heard it snap, and couldn't believe what had happened when I looked over. I wasn't that close to it, but kind of coming and going there, on campus and the like, watching the weather conditions. We had some tornado warnings that morning around. Had a situation for a while. We hadn't had many FSU, campus tornado warnings. I mean, over the years, but all the hurricane warnings lately have, kind of dwarfed all this. But you can kind of see here, this was a front. We had a bunch of tornado warnings that day. This wasn't a tornado, but it was, we had the overall pattern knotting us down. But my point is, these powerful weather makers with lines and, the storms, You know, this is a time of year if you're not having an active tropics and you start to have the cooling, you know, when the contrast in the inner masses, you can get storms like that storm. We had a tornado warning for the campus, not an actual tornado for campus. We had a bunch of warnings that morning there, October 14th, 2014. Again, you know, you probably can't really tell unless you're really familiar with the campus. I mean, the bookstore is different now. It's in the New Union there, but, you know, the bookstore over used to be to the right up there. And, you know, kind of up front where this tree is, but you kind of see the store line. This is a roadway, a pathway there. And 11 years ago, this tree there fell, you know, covering the road there, the FSU bookstore and Woodward Garage. We had a tornado warning earlier on. We didn't have a tornado warning when this happened. It was already over then. We had, you know, a lot of folks without power around the region, saturated ground. I believe maybe it was, you know, something where, you know, some folks at the state capitol were, you know, really worried about this as well. So the weather, it was a nasty morning, that tornado warning coming up there while I was over at the stadium for a class. So, you know, it was you know, wet, you know, pattern there. Stormy power outages, not what's on campus, but obviously this did have that impact there. We're not quite there yet. I know we're still a week away from this, but my point is if you don't get tornadoes, you know, with like a tropical system, or severe weather with, you know, a tropical system, a tropical weather pattern like what we've had lately, you might kind of revert back to this where you have these fronts come in and you get stuff like this, even though this wasn't, you know, necessarily severe direct, you know, because it happened after, because it's saturated ground, I would assume, and the like, but you can get indirect here, you know, from just everything coming on in there with the severe that's causing other direct problems. So that's kind of just something to bring up here real quick. If we don't get tropical, we could get a pattern like this there as we're looking, as we're tracking things. So just thought I'd bring that up. It crossed my mind. So I just wanted to bring that here into the equation as we're looking, as we're tracking things here. Again, that's to pretty much do it here for tonight. I'm meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center. You can see Camden County, some heavy convection there now here at 3:16 in the morning, and we got some action coming toward Glenn County. Let me go ahead and say that here. And then you can get the interactive radar, clutter.com/radar. But of course, you know, if we have any warnings, we'll be, you know, letting you guys know in terms of like severe thunderstorm warnings, flash flood warnings. Of course, if we had a tornado warning, we'd be on immediately. But, you know, not really expecting that, but it's not totally impossible, I guess. But this isn't, you know, really something that would probably trigger many, if any, real warnings in that regard in terms of the convective warnings. They get a flash flood warning or two. It's been training though eventually after we start seeing a more saturated ground. So that's something to kind of be mindful of. You see some of these gustier numbers on the anemometers. 21 there, Brunswick, McKinnon Airport. 28 there on Glencoe. In the last hour, give or take, you see heavy downpour. East side of Jacksonville, you see 24 miles an hour there on the Mayport Naval Air Facility. So yeah, we're watching some of this convection here. We're keeping you guys up to date, but nothing overwhelming now. But it's going to be wet. Have that poncho ready for all those games, you know, as we're looking, as we're tracking things. Definitely going to have that impact there. You see Central Florida, some rain, Titusville, you know, also around Daytona Beach, you have some precip up there. So definitely something to be mindful of. You know, and as you go downstate, you have some stuff there toward some of these areas like around Homestead, of course. You know, I was thinking meteorology of Homestead because they got hit by Andrew so hard in 92. But, you know, you obviously have just, you know, this normal type of weather that can be, you know, making things a little wet, a little slick, not that big of a deal. But got to be careful on the roads here for sure. So that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in and trusting me. We'll be back here as needed, not turning logo red. We have the coastal flood warnings. So that's going to be an issue with these winds here coming on in toward our eastern zones. You know, that northeastern wind is an issue in terms of all that water coming in terms of, you know, those areas that can have that vulnerability, you know, seeing that come into play there and having some issues at times. So you just got to be aware of that. You just got to remain alert for that possibility as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. Let me see if there are any questions or comments real quick before I wrap it on up for those that are watching live. Let me see if we have anything here. For any of the viewers at home. Don't see anything, but I appreciate everybody tuning in. Just have a great night, everybody. stay safe. You know, it's an active weekend in terms of just all the different events around. So, you know, gotta be careful with traffic and the like here, you know, with the wet conditions. And have the lights on when it's raining, obviously, even if it's not dark. So be very careful, you know, be very mindful here that things could be, you know, a little bit, you know, even if you don't have light, you don't have, you know, severe storm, got a gusty, you know, could get a tree or two to fall on a road somewhere. You know, just be careful with this and be kind of mindful that it's not going to be the, you know, greatest conditions out there. We do need the rain, though. We're getting that. Yeah, be careful of slick spots in the road and the like here. So just be taking your time there the best you can. You know, travel safe here as you're going to different events, whether Gainesville, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, or, you know, the high school games in various cities like Palatka. So where Bradford's going. So have a great night, everybody. Again, have a great weekend. We'll pop back in if warranted.